We're in an LS3 powered JK with a 6L80 after driving these Gen 5s for the last 4 or 5 test drives, getting into this LS3 and not having that instant torque right off idle is readily apparent. Now don't get me wrong, this JK runs awesome and it's got plenty of power, but the power is up higher in the RPM range, especially with the LS3 because it doesn't have variable valve timing. When you go from a V6 to an LS, it's like, wow, a giant difference. You think this is top of the line, but then when you get a Gen 5, after you put some time on it and then you get back into a LS, the difference is readily apparent. That instant torque and the fact that you have to run the premium gas in this engine. It's got lower compression than the Gen 5, but it does require a higher grade fuel, and you got to get it up in the revs to get into its power band, where the Gen 5s are in their power band at lower RPM, and it's a different kind of driving, which I prefer. This Jeep does run excellent, but it's just an older generation, and I think that the delineation between the Gen 4 and the Gen 5 is now becoming apparent. This Jeep was actually built about 6 years ago, maybe 7, and it's in the shop to get the latest and greatest updates, which include the new MoCan module, so it's been converted from a MoTech module. It got our new billet accessory drive for the LS3 and a lot of firmware updates. In fact, check this out. We are in drive. I'm going to set my cruise control. So cruise is set now. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull it back into the manual gate. You can see we're in 5th. And if I want to downshift, upshift, we're in cruise control and have tap shift available to us. Now I want to speed up, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back into drive. I'm going to bump up the cruise to, let's say, 60, let's go to 65. Now notice that this LS3 is going to downshift to get there, where a Gen 5 probably would have not. But we got there just in a different way. So let's get back to 65. And then we can go back into our tap shift gate. And now we have tap shift available to us. So it's preferring 5th gear. If this were a Gen 5 LT, my guess would be we'd be in 6th or 7th gear. The LS3 is really the grandfather of the small block Chevy from 1955. 1955 Ford, and in the mid-50s Chevy made a lot of progress in overhead valve V8 design. They were very expensive to build prior to the 1950s, and because of core technology, core casting technology that allowed many cores to be reduced to a minimal amount of cores or castings, it drove the price of these V8s down. The small block Chevy came out in 1955, 265 cubic inch, and by 1957 it was a 283, then a 302, 327, there was a 305, 350, a lot of 383s out there, 400s. It just grew and grew, and essentially it was the displacement that increased the horsepower of that engine. And the LS3 has basically built on that design. They've gone to a relatively high compression engine, but they're still using the same overhead valve technology. They're using roller cam, roller lifters to reduce friction and allow better cam profiles, but essentially it is an improved version of a 50-year-old engine. The LTs, on the other hand, have really induced new technology. The continuous variable valve timing, direct injection, you guys all know what I'm talking about, has taken a small block Chevy to a different level in my opinion. And we cannot forget the transmission technology. The 4-speed Chrysler, say the one that was in the early JKs, was horrible. That transmission really comes from the 1980s. High friction, poor gearing, and the 3.8 engine was dragged down by that transmission. If you took a 3.8 engine and put the new ZF 8-speed in it, it may be legitimate for a lot of the JKs out there, just like the 3.6s in the JL right now. But the 4-speed really robbed the JK of a lot of its performance. The 5-speed was a big improvement. The 3.6 was a big improvement. One of the downfalls of the 3.6 and the 3.8, however, are the smaller displacement. The smaller displacement engines are not inherently as efficient as the larger displacement engine in moving heavy weight. They're great at moving lighter weight. I have a minivan with a 3.6 and a 9-speed, and it does great. And the 3.8 was designed essentially for minivans, and it did good in that application. But in a 6,000–7,000 pound JK with 1 tons and 40s, it falls on its face. So by going to a larger displacement engine like an LT, there's a couple of things that we have to consider. We have tremendous torque, and it's torque that moves weight. So therefore the LT can be more efficient at moving a JK than the smaller V6. At the same time, we have cylinder shifting or cylinder displacement technology, so we can take a 6.2 and turn it into a 3.1 and try to mimic the efficiency of the V6 engine by reducing the pumping losses through air-fuel management, displacement on demand, multiple displacement system, whatever you want to call it. And again, this LS3 is moving this JK just fine, but you can see I really got to get into the throttle and get it into its power band before you realize that power. And prior to driving the LTs, I will say that this was my favorite engine. The LS3, the L99 are awesome engines, but now driving the LTs, I am spoiled, and I have to say that I would prefer an LT in my Jeep over an LS. And a lot of you guys watched my early videos where I was on the fence. The LTs were having some teething problems, the 8-speeds were having some shifting issues, but now that that's all dialed in, and I have done test drive after test drive after test drive with the LTs, I get it's something else, and it just doesn't feel as good. So this LS3 is going to the mountain, and that's kind of where its home is. It's a performance engine, it's a simple engine. Don't overlook it if that's what you're looking for. I will say that the new LTs do outperform pretty much everything in the Gen 4 lineup, but they're just not as simple, and we all know that the more parts there are, the less reliable something is. However, as things get rationalized, they become more and more reliable. The reality is the LT is not the most complex engine out there. If you look at the Pentastar engine, for example, that's double overhead cam, and you all know that double overhead cam engines have been around a long time. Not only is the Pentastar engine double overhead cam, but it's also VVT, and it has an EGR valve, which is very complex. So in a way, the original engine in your JK, if you have a 3.6, is more complex than an LT. So while the LTs are very complex, that doesn't mean they're not reliable and won't go the distance in the long run. I think GM has done their homework to make these engines reliable, because remember, GM has to crank these things out by the million. They're not like the European manufacturers. BMW, Audi, they all had issues with direct injection when they first introduced it. Carbon buildup behind the valve, blow-by, you name it. But GM has spent millions and millions of CAD hours designing the cylinder heads, because that's where everything happens. The rest of the engine is nothing but an air pump, pretty much just an air pump. There's some oiling things going on, and GM has to produce these engines to put in work trucks that guys are going to abuse and not maintain. So if you put one in your JK and you maintain it, the odds are that it's going to go the distance for you. So we're going to hit the mountain right now. So we're off the mountain with the LS3 JK. It did great, as we expected. I will say also that the tap-in cruise is not my favorite, to be honest about that. Spinning the wheel around, anytime you have a paddle or a lever on a wheel off-road and you're spinning it around, it's kind of hard to tell which way is up and which way is down. So that is going to be up to you guys. We're going to set the Mocan up so you can use a discrete switch input and or the cruise control switch, but off-road it did prove to be troublesome. So the days of the LS3 are numbered in the newer JKs. We're going to be focusing our efforts on the Gen 5s, but this is still a good old swap. If you have an early JK, it'll get the job done. And you might want to take a look at the L99, which is essentially the VVT version of this engine. It has a little bit more torque on the bottom. What we really noticed with this LS3 is, well, it has plenty of power. Most of it's in the upper band, and the 6L80 does a really good job of dealing with that. But after driving the Gen 5s for a while and you get used to that instant torque off idle, the LS3 does feel a little soft on the bottom. So we're going to be doing some more Gen 4 and Gen 5 swaps coming up soon.